Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies, where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome for the first time Daniel Kremer onto the show, who is a filmmaker, film historian, biographer, professional film archivist, a veteran home video audio commentator, and DVD slash Blu-ray extras producer. Some of his films include Overwhelm the Sky, Raise Your Kids on Seltzer, It's a Zabriskie, 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 Zabriskie Point, Cruel, Usual, Necessary, The Passion of Silvio Narizzano, and we are discussing his book today on Sidney J Furie, which is called Sidney J Furie, Life and Films. Daniel, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, nice to be seen. It's probably the most normal title of that entire lineup is Sidney J. Furie, Life and Films.
Yeah, yeah, the simplest. But I love all of your titles because they're so intriguing. But of course, as I mentioned, we're talking about your Fury book. Before we get into the nitty gritty of the book, but just from listening to other interviews you've done, and of course your introduction in the book, this Fury, from my impression, seems to go beyond you just having a passion for his films. I mean, it's very deeply personal to you. And could you talk a little bit about why his films are so personal to you?
Yes, I mean, I grew up like many millennials my age. My brothers and I grew up on the Superman films, and so the first film I would have seen, unfortunately, would have been the fourth entry in that
All
in
right.
that Christopher Reeve series. And of course, you're a kid, so you don't judge things like that too harshly. And so my brothers used to torment me with playing General Zod and all that kind of stuff. So it was I really was weaned on those films, but I began becoming aware of what looking out for the directors' names in the credits quite early, because they were always the last one to pop up, before the movie actually began, and I began to notice names. By the time I was my film education really began in earnest. A couple pivotal points in my history. One was getting the TLA film guide, which I have. Yeah, the formative text I have right in within
Oh yeah.
uh, within arm's length at all times. This is but it's not just any guide. It's the 1992-93 guide because the graphic design I found very inviting.
Oh wow.
Uh, for what and I was very so I began getting into foreign art house films at a obscenely early age, for someone whose parents were not in the film industry at all.
Mm.
So it began there, but my film education in earnest began when I would come home from a day of like grade school, and I would turn on Bravo as it was way back when at their outset, and because they would play films every day, mostly British films. And so I would come home and I would watch like Stevie with Glenda Jackson, and I'd be completely enwrapped in that, and then in that type of film, or the Beaufort's Gun, or any number of films. And then one day they had the Ipcress file on,
Mm.
and it completely redefined or rejiggered my atoms in that sense. It's like I didn't know a movie could look like that, or that a camera could compose or stage like that. Shots from behind things, through objects, kind of these trick shots, which I learned later, both invited and really beguiled people as much as I guess it infuriated others, if you'll pardon the pun. And I immediately began trying to I began making my own little amateur films with our little hi8 camcorder, and the first shots that I ever stole were were Fury shots. I remember with my using my younger cousin, who must have been like 9 or 10 years old, and I'm doing this like Bergman-esque like marital drama with her as the wife. I was a weird kid, what can I say? But um, putting a pair of eyeglasses on the edge of a table and then filming up through the lenses
Oh,
so
right.
that she
Yeah.
and planting marks for her so that she'd land on the spot to make her blur through the lens. And that was like, so I was like immediately so utterly fascinated and captivated by this approach to shot making and to a way of seeing that I began immediately trying to like emulate it and to try to I guess to try to understand it more, to try to understand what that type of thing did, what it achieved, what it accomplished in the body of trying to tell a movie story. So that really Sidney Furie set me on my path to filmmaking. Um, I guess, and I'm not going to compare myself to Spielberg, but I guess the way that he was, in the Fablemans, trying to re uh, stage the train wreck in order to kind of make sense of it for himself or to make it less scary. Um, in my own way, I was doing that with these Fury shots in these in the Ipcress file, and then later on in life, I would see other films. I saw the Appaloosa, I saw the Naked Runner, and I saw so many of the other movies. I was like, wow, this guy's got a true visual voice. So then I got hold of like, okay, he's got also got a thematic voice,
Mm,
and I'm like, how is it that no one heretofore has written about him? How is it that he really hasn't been covered? And I was like, at a certain point, I was like, I've never written a book before. I've written articles and things, but I want to write a book to right this wrong,
right.
or to cover this uncovered guy, because I think it's kind of a bit of a travesty that he had been so neglected for as long as he had been. So I immediately began to try to track him down. And the funny thing there is he actually is a very private person and doesn't never always kind of tend to try to avoid that type of attention. As he told me later, it's like I never had a press agent when I could have used it to forward myself and to make myself more of a brand like the way Francis did. Or like I just like did my work and kept my head down and kept quiet, and I always liked it that way. I didn't I don't so when and then I it took the convincing of his family who knew that I was after him. I guess somehow they learned that, oh, there's a guy, who I understand called the house and he wants to do a book. Dad, you should do it. And then it was his friend Paul Lynch who directed Prom Night, among other many other Canadian movies, including The Hard Part Begins, which just came out on CIP a couple years ago, which is a great film. And it was Paul who finally did, the convincing. Who Paul and his lovely Liverpudlian accent was just like, Sidney, do it. Everyone has a book. You don't. Um, and finally, I get this email one day when I was living in New York, and it just was one line: "Haven't you anything better to do?" And I panicked, and I was like, "Oh, Mr. Fury, you don't understand. You've been so influential on my art and my life, and blah blah blah." And he goes, "No, no, that was just my stab at humor. I guess I shouldn't joke over email, but like," and he said, like, listen, I like being private. I've never sought the limelight, but what he does, and then immediately like my tires deflated. But like the last uh sentence at the end of this email is like, but I've read your article that you wrote, because I wrote a blog piece on him. It's like, and I read your article. I was very impressed by it. You treated me fairly, and I feel like I should listen to what you have in mind. So
Mm,
what do you have in mind? And we had a call the very next day on the phone, and is like, listen, I'm coming to Toronto to do sound mixing on this little movie that I did a year or two ago, and I could swing by New York and I could spend a couple days with you there, so that you can begin to get me on the record. And of course, I was giddy. I
mm,
was like,
I
I'm gonna
bet.
meet. It sounds crazy. I mean, it's like it was bigger to me than meeting, any like meeting Spielberg or Coppola, whom I got to meet later. But it was, and then I remember, the morning of, I was like waking up. I was so excited, and I was like really like shaking almost. And like I walk into the Mark on the Upper East Side, and there he is on one of the front sofas, and he gets up to shake my hand, and it's like the closest I've come to an out of body experience, where I was like, oh my God, I'm shaking the hand of the man who made me want to make movies. And then he's like, come on, let's go to breakfast. And then we began taping, and we became very close. So yeah, it was that's
Right.
how it all got going. Yeah.
It's such an incredible story, which I'm glad you included that in the introduction of the book in the book. And you know you touched on. I know we've been talking on social media, and you know you said, you know, how are you the first person to have been talking about about Fury, and even myself. I mean, I would consider myself a film buff, but before reading your book and doing a deeper dive into his work, you know, all I knew about him was that he directed Brando in a movie called The Appaloosa, which I've seen, and that he was did the first ever English Canadian feature film as well, which of course is A Dangerous Age. And that he tried to get a Canadian film industry going, got fed up and left. I mean, that was pretty much all. You know, that was all I knew about him. And I was watching these films, and you know, some of them are masterpieces, and a number of them are fantastic. I mean, he made a lot of films. I'll certainly see more, but I saw a decent amount, which we'll get into, I'm sure. And I'm surprised as well how, you know, a lot of these films are fantastic. So it's probably impossible to nail down. But do you have any idea as to why he's perhaps been neglected?
Well, he became known as a synonymous, I guess, for a while with a style of kind of what you might call gimmicky uh, directing. There were people who were very enraptured and entranced by the Ipcress approach and the what I came to call the wild angles films, the wild angles trilogy of films,
Right.
that being Ipcress File, Appaloosa, and The Naked Runner. And he was, and if I go, like I've met a number of very well, like first class filmmakers over the years, including like Phil Kaufman. I mean, here I know Joe Dante. We have lunch every now and then, and I work for Trailers from Hell
Yeah.
for Uncle Joe. And I mean, I've met so many directors who were coming up around that time who, I mean, you asked Joe about Fury, whom, you know, like when Sid came on to the movies that made me podcast with Joe, Joe was completely geeking out.
Oh
Like,
wow.
and at one point, I think one of them says like it's not often that we are speechless at the gravity of our guest. Um, because like Joe was like I followed him from way back, and then by the time I saw the Ipcress file, Joe was like, I thought to myself, this guy is completely reinventing movies.
Hmm.
It's like I was completely convinced that this guy was like, a total original, and like I looked forward with great anticipation for what came next, and like I followed him all through the years. And Phil Kaufman was just like the Appaloosa. He made the Appaloosa, didn't he? Oh my God, those shots! I was affected by that for years. But like the critics of the time though just thought like, oh, this is gimmicky, this is just it's empty style. What's he gonna do next? Put the camera up the horse's ass and all these kind of jibes that were being taken at him. And the critical jibes kind of scared Sid away from that visual kind of patois, I guess that if you want to call it that. I'm mixing my terms here a little bit, but that
Right.
he kind of patented. Um, so like he makes the lawyer, which like still is not as even near as stylized, but there's a little bit of it in there, and
Yeah.
like he continued like kind of experimenting, and like by the time he gets back to the entity is back to that Ipcress file, Appaloosa style.
Mhm.
So and really throughout, even in Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York, which I
Wow.
love that film, and I always have. And that's out of the box set that I produced, which I could pull out here. I have
Yes, I gotta get that because
yeah.
that's
No,
quite. Yeah.
yeah, this is like if you
There
want
we
to begin your Fury research, I guess if you want to really dive headfirst into it, my book and this set, which contains like it's a. I cannot believe that imprint let me run as wild on this as I did, but the extras are insane. The number of things that we
Yes.
did. Um,
That's a film course or a year in film school right there, if
yeah,
not.
yeah, it is your course in fury. It is your crash course in fury. Um, but really learning that kind of how much he meant to not critics per se, but other filmmakers who he means more to filmmakers than he does to classically, I guess, the critics of that age. And the proof is in the pudding. Kubrick, kind of lifted from him.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone, I mean, so many people have come forward to say, like, listen, I love Fury, and you have like people like the DP, the cinematographer Stephen Burum, who say, like, I've worked with three great directors in my years: Brian De Palma, Francis Coppola, Sidney Furie.
Mm,
Is like that's what he said. It's like and the people who have worked with him and other and fellow filmmakers are normally like if they know enough. I'm kind of smarmily convinced that if they wisecrack about Fury, it's like, oh, Superman 4 and Ladybugs and Iron Eagle is just like, you're not re you're making a kind of irresponsible assertion based on that little evidence that he's some type of hack. But if you really dig deeply more into the filmography, you're going to see a not just a stylist, but a hyper stylist who it tends to focus on a set number of themes and approaches to scenes and the type of characters that he's attracted to. It's a meal. People who have done the digging say like, I had no idea there was this much of a wealth of fascinating films. Like even the Cliff Richard movies that he did in England in the early '60s have things in them that you would not expect. You
right.
know.
Right.
Uh, so it is a meal. It is a multi-course meal. And then
Mm.
like by the time you get to those later direct-to-video movies, there are a number of the ones in there that I quite like, and other ones that I don't like so much. But I mean, one of the things that he asked me early on was like, "You don't like all of my movies, do you?" I was like, "No, no, 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 no." I was like, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah.
I was like, I don't. I don't know. He wanted to know that he was dealing with a real person and not just like some a full person and not a weirdo, so yeah. But no, but Hollow Point among the later ones, I love Hollow Point. I have a respect and a warmth towards Global Heresy. I like going back. There are a number of the later direct-to-video movies that
Right.
I think are that have elements of his signature. But it is a big meal. He's made 50 movies,
Yeah.
so there's a
Oh,
lot in.
yeah, and not, very few people can say that they did. And it's fascinating because not only did he make so many movies, but we have these different periods. We have his Canadian period, then the British New Wave, then he goes into Hollywood, then he does the direct to video. So I wonder if that also has something to do with why he's been dismissed is because there's so many and they're all like there's no way to sort of
Yeah,
pigeonhole him,
yeah,
you know.
sure. I mean, tend to be, a bit more of a general statement. The Auteurist scholars tend to gravitate more towards filmmakers and artists who really set up their homestead in a kind of a set genre, Hitchcock
Yeah.
with thrillers and Hawks either with rough and ready genre pictures or fast talking comedies or any number of artists who really set up shop in a particular area, whereas Sydney has really dabbled in every genre. And then you look at like like I always say that if I were to have haunted anyone's uh, skin, or if I could have been inhabited any filmmaker's body throughout their career, like Fury, because like Canadian independent cinema and early Canadian TV at that,
Yeah.
British New Wave, the end of the old Hollywood and the beginning of the new Hollywood,
Right.
through to the new kind of um, go at making kind of more commercial cinema in the Reagan era, and then all the way into the direct-to-video market where he went back to Canada for mostly, and with the idea that listen, it's a chance to work.
Mm,
Filmmaking is like my golf. There's no chance that these movies are going to be like seriously reviewed. There's no pressure. There's no, it's just a chance to work. And for me to swing at the ball is exactly how he put it. That's the words that he used. And he believes firmly in this idea of a bus in the rain, which is basically like, you get a piece of material. It's maybe not all there at first, but then you get on that bus, that project, because it's a rainy, cold, windy night, and you try to get that bus to go where you want it to go. That
right,
warm, nice, dry bus. You try to get that bus to go where you want it to go, and you work like hell, and sometimes it takes you all the way. And Ipcress was one of those. It was a horrible script to begin with, and we threw it out. But that's a bus in the rain that we got to go where we wanted it to go.
right.
And of course, in the process, he gets to hang these things with which he is fascinated on these projects. Some of, I mean, it's not that he didn't spearhead his own projects. Sometimes the ones that he was handed to do, I think he made his own, and and as I always say, like, how can you make as I'm often asked, how can you make the auteurist argument when directors are handed films to do? And it's like, well, if a director is worth talking about at all, is worth having a conversation about, most of the time they will have had the power to say no, I'm
Mm,
not going to do that. And when they say yes to a project, I was just talking to a friend yesterday about this. Is like, about we were talking about hagiography and the danger of it at one point in the conversation. I was like, listen, I was accused of it a bit when I was going up to bat for movies like Ladybugs, but like he makes Ladybugs as opposed to any other Rodney Dangerfield vehicle, like Back to School.
mm,
Why does he do Ladybugs? It's like,
right,
well, I mean, Ladybugs ties right in. Another emasculated dude
right.
who who has to dress up his soon-to-be stepson in a dress in order to win the respect of his soon-to-be wife and his boss. He has to lower himself to that degree as a man. Is like, and then it's absurd on one level to connect that back up with a movie like the Leather Boys. Like how could the guy who made Ladybugs make that the Ipcress file or the Leather Boys? But like, you begin to think a little more intently about well, that particular vehicle, what was in there that this director hung
Right,
things on,
right.
so and that was where I guess entered a certain territory with certain people who I mean the book got mostly like well, almost entirely good reviews, but when I was critiqued, it was like, oh, it was hagiographic to take that type of a stance on a movie as trivial as, name one in that latter era. And it's like, well, if you're really looking closely at the films rather than just saying like, oh, that's just nonsense, I'm not going to look at that at all. That's that your responsibility as a biographer is to look at everything seriously, no matter how trivial the movie might be.
Right.
Like I've got to like with Irving Rapper right now, I've got to look at and I've encountered a guy who believes that his last movie, Born Again, is his best movie.
Mm,
I don't. There's no way in hell I believe that because uh, I know from Irving Rapper's letters that he was a dyed in the wool anti-Reagan liberal in his latter years, and making a movie about a Nixon apparatchiks born again evangelical Christian conversion is you know I don't know. It seems a bit like a filmmaker being held hostage, but at first glance, and then you have a closer look at it, it's like, okay, the idea of conversion in Rapper is prevalent from Now Voyager, which is about a woman's finding herself, how she got her groove, I guess you might even say her conversion to becoming the full uh, fleshed out lady that she becomes by the end of the movie. And then you go into other films of rappers, like, okay, even though I don't like the idea of Born Again in this filmography, as I might not like the idea of Iron Eagle 4 in the Fury filmography or whatever. Um, you've got to look at all these things from a serious vantage point
Yeah.
and take everything and look at everything with not even a hint of dismissiveness because it's all part of a picture.
Hmm. Well, it's that that's you write about this, and it really stood out to me is that wounded masculinity plays a big part in so many of his films. After getting to know him all these years, did he ever tell you why that was something that interested him so much?
I mean, he like a lot of auteurs when they or people that we might deem as such. I think even guys like John Ford is like, oh, I just make them. I don't know. I'm not paying attention to blah blah blah.
Right, right,
I'm not. They're not. I'm not conscious of whatever. And I think many directors, when you bring up these threads to them or whatnot, even my friendship with Joan Micklin Silver, if I brought up a thread or like most of the time, it was like, I never noticed that before. Recently, on with John Badham, talking about how like you're really into subcultures, you're really into the dark charismatic, the figure of the dark charismatic, these guys who are magnetic, but there's the darkness underneath their magnetism. And then I was like naming all these threads throughout Badham's movies. Like Badham never thought of that. He just was
subconscious,
attracted
I
to,
guess.
yeah,
Yeah,
subconscious. He's directors are attracted to certain material for
right.
whatever ineffable to them, an ineffable reason.
Mm,
And it's a lot like archaeology in a way when a biographer or a film theorist or a you know cineast or whatever is looking at these things and trying to find like what's the thing here. I'm
yeah.
sure Sylvia Marzano, about whom I just made a documentary, would have never cared to really get to the bottom of the most overt, like dancing in front of you queerness I've ever seen in any director outside of John Waters. Um, I'm sure that he was aware of it maybe on some level, but to actually grapple with it, I'm sure he was attracted to certain material based on like
Mm,
what can I pull out of it. He was fired for making a project too gay at one point. He was fired from The Man Who Had Power Over Women for that reason. So, for making the project, for infusing his gayness into it, he was fired.
mm,
So like he was it's constantly for Naritsana became the object of like what how okay, I get this project. What can I hang what I want to hang on it?
right.
And how does that manifest from film to film? And then as a film theorist, it's exciting because you're pointing out like look at this. I wonder, like what's this about? Look closer at this. And so it's always this idea of looking closer at things that the directors were probably subconsciously just putting in because they felt it was right.
Right. They, was it challenging to get, because this was your first book, was it challenging to get it published because people don't think
I was lucky.
unfortunately don't think much of him? I was curious what that process was like.
I was very lucky in that regard, in that I was connected with Patrick McGilligan early on. Paul Lynch, who is, as I mentioned earlier, is a Canadian director.
Yeah.
He's longtime best friend. Since it was right around the time he was editing Lady Sings the Blues that Paul and Sydney became friends, and they have remained close. But it was Paul who took me out to lunch one day. He's like, "What do you have planned for this book of yours?" And I was like, "Well, I'd like to get it published, obviously somewhere. I don't know." And it's like, "Well, my very good friend is Marilyn Moss, and Marilyn Moss just wrote a book. I think her book at the time was on Raoul Walsh.
Mm.
She just wrote a book on Raoul Walsh for a guy, Paul's exact words, a guy named McGillicuddy. I'll, I'll I'll connect you with her, and she can maybe put you in touch with this McGillicuddy person." And that's basically how it happened. And Pat, from early on, I pitched it to him. I emailed him. I said, I remember I was in a line on a line for Megabus going from New York to Philadelphia, and like typing out this email on my phone, like, my name is Daniel Kremer. No reason why you would know me, but I'm writing my first book on SIDNEY J Furie and blah blah blah. And I was like, and Pat was like, "Oh, of course I know. I met him years ago, and I think it was on the set of Gable and Lombard." Um, and whoops, um, sorry, and yeah, I'd be interested if you want to draw up a proposal and give me a sample chapter of the type of thing that you have in mind. I'm open to, to anything. And of course, I didn't get any kind of advance. It was just like I was an unproven risk to a certain degree, but it was such a passion project to me that I would come home from I had an office job at the time in the video department of a small New York firm. I'd go to there and then I'd come home and I'd be toiling away getting the chapters up and trying to arrange interviews with people and everything. It was like truly a passion project if ever there was one. I didn't care if I wasn't getting paid for it. I felt like I needed to do it.
Right.
And I turned in my sample chapter and my proposal, and they approved it, and I was off to the races. So that's how it all happened. I was very lucky in that regard.
And now, because you're, I mean, I'm always attracted to people who do so many things in the arts, because you're a screenwriter, filmmaker, you do the Blu-ray audio commentaries and so many things. Now, was writing books part of your goal in life, or how did, or was it just that this story needed to be told and you're like, I'm gonna just do the book?
Um, I didn't set out to be I guess a biographer originally. I knew I was going to be involved in some manner of film studies outside of my own personal filmmaking.
Right.
I was the guy at my film school who was in charge of the programming the weekly screening series, Film Fridays. I was the Film Fridays guy, and I was constantly trying to program the movies that the students didn't know, hadn't heard of, and some of the professors occasionally hadn't heard of. But, that was my thrill. That was my main. I was very enthusiastic about like digging up uh, titles that had been neglected or whatnot. So I had a feeling I was heading towards that in a certain degree. I never thought it would manifest per se in writing books about film.
I see.
That's something that I very much enjoyed when I was writing the Fury book, and then I kind of I told myself after that, like, I'd like to continue doing this in some form or fashion. So I turned to Joan Micklin Silver, which has been a many years in process project. And then I got to work with her, and I got to know her very well and also become friends with her. She's since passed on. And now I'm moving on to my first uh, deceased subject, or rather one that I never met. I met Joan. I got to spend time with her. I got a direct record from her. Irving, I never met, so this is the first time I'm going up to bat for a subject that I haven't met.
Hmm. Well, I'm
I would
sure
have,
we're all
yeah.
looking forward to that one because, yeah, Rapper is a great filmmaker and a great subject. I'm sure. What One thing that really stood out to me about Fury was he had this confidence with filmmaking when he started, and now as the budgets grew and his success grew, did he ever just talk about where his confidence was at the was he did it always just keep going up? Did he ever have a shaky period? Or I was curious about that.
And, I mean, he was like a guided missile when it came to, it's like, I don't want to go in TV. He worked a little in TV in Canada with Hudson's Bay, but he didn't really do a lot in the way of TV like a lot of his comrades, like Ted Kotcheff, who's another Canadian director that I got to meet and spend a little time with and work with a little bit on Blu-ray projects. But Ted like dabbled for a while in British television, and Narzano as well also was in British television. I'm also documentary wise, I'm working on a getting off the ground a follow-up to the Nerazzano documentary, which is a documentary about another neglected filmmaker. That's kind of my shtick, if you want to call it that, is I like people who haven't been covered yet.
Yeah.
I think there are millions of films and
Yeah.
filmmakers, and I feel that we only talk about a, a select, very impressive few,
Yeah.
but I feel like we're overlooking a lot of gold. So I tend to focus on guys who haven't been covered, or girls or ladies that haven't been covered as well. I don't want to be I want to be gender neutral here. But Yeah, I so with Sid, he went right into film and didn't really relent. That because that's he wanted to make movies. He didn't want to do tele. He wanted to make feature motion pictures, and so he really was set from early on, and he followed that path to the end. He eventually did do a couple '90s shows, a couple episodes, I think, for paychecks, but I mostly it was all film. So a shaky period would have probably been around the time of Sheila Levine and Gable and Lombard back to back.
Right.
Uh, Now he recognizes Sheila, at least, as he talks about, like, oh, I remember sitting in the theater at Paramount and checking the Sheila Levine prints and watching the movie multiple times over and over again, and on a loop, and thinking to myself, this is a pretty good movie. I really like this movie. I'm proud of this. And then by the time it was unleashed on the public and the critics, it was a massacre of that film. Now, ironically, I was going to say, with this box set, we have so many people kind of rediscovering at least these films and maybe digging a bit more. But the most popular movie in that box set is Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York.
Yeah.
If you go to the Letterboxd, if you go to the Turner Classic Movies site with the user reviews, and even the critics of these Blu-ray packages, the movie that they love the most is Sheila Levine.
I'm not surprised.
It goes
Yeah.
to show you that what 50 years can do, with a movie now divorced from the bestseller that birthed it, because the movie and the book couldn't be more different from each other. That it's the most radical reimagining of a novel I think I've ever known. And I've seen Roland Joffe's, The Scarlet Letter. So that's um yeah, it's just it's a radical reimagining, and people didn't like it at the time, and they didn't like other things about it. It's, I think, in terms of certain politics. But now I think, even, divorced from all of that, I think people are finding Sheila Levine to be the wonderful, romantic, dramatic, kind of like a romantic comedy melodrama that it's always been, with
Mm.
this weird noirish palette,
Yeah.
and these strange long takes, and like this it's a style piece. I said I told him when I was like, I really love Sheila Levine, and Sydney was like, oh, really, you do? I was like, yeah, I love that film. It's like, oh, that's great to hear. And I was like, I love Hit too, but Sheila Levine is like, tell me, like, the lighting palette in it is so dark, and it's like, yeah, that was Gordon Willis, but that was also, I see the movie as a bit of a noir. I was like, ah, that makes sense. Like,
Which is
who else would have seen that? Who
yeah.
else would have seen
No
that
one
piece
would
of
have done
material as a noir? It's like,
that.
it's a completely different way of seeing,
It
as
totally
far, and that's
worked too. It totally,
yeah,
you could have easily brightened that up, but
yeah,
it completely worked. And I'm somewhat surprised it didn't do well at the time, because if you look at a few years later with Unmarried Woman, it's a very
yeah,
similar story in some ways. But
right.
I would imagine, maybe because of Scheider's character's politics, he's pro-life and everything. He's very vocal. I imagine those things didn't sit well. I know you wrote about that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, I had to address it, but I mean, I love what Molly Haskell wrote about Roy Scheider in that movie. Molly Haskell wrote in her initial review of it, she said Roy Scheider has a Shetland sweater charm, which means, like, he's an old-fashioned bloke, and he's
Yeah,
like
yes, yes.
kind
Yeah.
of, yeah. So, um, it's kind of the interesting aspect, one of the interesting aspects of the relationship between Sheila and the Sam character, is that she's this progressive lady, who's like, very, very headstrong and very innovative, and she redefines her workplace and, get pitches her boss on this album, telling children's uh, adult stories of when they were children to make them. She's like a very creative, very go-getter type mind, which is a very progressive thing for that period. A career woman, who's very driven by that, and then she's attracted to this old-fashioned bloke who has very antiquated feelings about things like abortion.
Yeah.
And I think that and talking early 1975, that troubled, I think, a lot of the people in the audience who were I think women, and who had loved Gail Parent's book.
Well,
Yeah, and Gail Parent was also less than thrilled about the adaptation, even though she's credited as the screenwriter. Most of the rewrite on that was Jeannie Berlin herself doing the rewrite, and Gail Parent was mortified when the people were coming out of the theater, and she was asking them what they thought, and she's credited her being credited as the screenwriter. The person said, "Didn't Gail Parent read her own book?" So that was kind of horrifying to the author and her writing partner, Kenny Solms, that they they have a certain experience on that film, which they're entitled to. And but I think and I it was a very fraught production, and I think as a result, Sid was surprised that he got something out of it at all, let alone something I think he thinks as good as what they wound up with.
yeah.
Um, so because that was a very very troubled production on that film. So that followed so closely by Gable and Lombard, which was uh, a screwball comedy melodrama in its way, emulating the 30s and 40s pictures of Gable and Lombard in its way. And you would ask most people, and they'd say, "Well, it failed at that, and worse." So that but he quickly redeemed himself in the eyes of the public with Boys of Company C and
Yeah.
critics largely. And then again with the years later with Superman 4, which was a debacle of rather epic proportions. But Sidney always moved on. Like he always said, like, even when Lady Sings the Blues was a monster success, I know I could have gone to the Oscars, but I was already off shooting Hit. Um, and I'd rather be shooting Hit than sitting there and potentially winning or not winning. It's like, who cares? I want to work. So he was already off and running on the next movie. So I've always loved that attitude of his. Like he's always kind of I don't want to say chastised me, but he's always been playful with me when I'm like, um, been very aggressive promoting the reviews of Overwhelm the Sky or whatever. It's like he'll always be like, "Who gives a shit? Move on to your next movie." He's like, "You're a filmmaker. You should be working and not like resting on your great reviews.
I love that.
Work on something else now." It's like that's his constitution is that.
I admire that about him because
Uh,
you're right, there is this romanticized view about filmmakers, and as an actor myself, actors as well, like, if an actor is doing a string of bad films, after doing a string of good ones, they sometimes get so heavily criticized, but sometimes it's like they need the money, like we forget that people have to work.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so yeah, but I
There's a
that he didn't care and he just kept working, you know.
there's a really hilarious story about my movie Overwhelm the Sky in particular, which is 3 hours long. We had intermission and overture and everything. I was very proud of that aspect, and we actually did very well with critics. For a black and white movie with no name actors, that's 3 hours long. We did damn well. But I remember telling Sydney originally, like, yeah, I'm gonna leave the movie at 3 hours. He blew a friggin' gasket. He's like, and his exact words were, "You're crazy. You've been spending too much time in a basement with your cats. You're nuts." And it was like, and then like eventually the reviews came in, and even though he wanted me to work on something immediately, he was like, "Yeah, these are good reviews." And he finally saw it, and he was like, okay, it works, it's fine, so like move on to your next thing. But I remember that you're spending too much time in the basement with your cats. Because this is the height of the San Francisco housing crisis. Where I was living there at the time in this in-law unit. It was an in-law unit in a larger house, so it was the base unit. And so that's the reference there. It's like you're spending too much time in the basement with your cat. Get out. Yeah, yeah. Same.
Good
That's,
advice.
I've thought of that many times and laughed furiously. So yeah.
Well, the way in which he worked with actors, I really admired because he seemed to know exactly what to give to give everyone. Like you wrote about how with Diana Ross, like she didn't even have she had like tiny bit of experience, but yet he knew exactly how to work with her and when to let people do improvisations and things like that. So did he I mean, is there any indication of as to how he learned how to work so well with actors? Like I know he liked the people from the actors studio in New York. He was attracted to that, but did he ever like study acting formally or anything or
Well, he was a theater graduate. He was a major when he was at Carnegie Tech. So he had academic training in mostly live theater. There was no film curriculum back when he went to school. He would have gone off in circa 1951 or so. So of course there was no film major. There was no film program anywhere. He had to he had to pursue theater, so he learned a great deal. But the funny thing is that he knew then that he wanted to make movies as a film director. So he would be the only theater student directing these little theater exercises with music score. He'd have background score, and the people would laugh. His fellow students would laugh at that. Um, and it was the teacher whose name is in the book. I forget his name, who said, "You guys might laugh, but Furie wants to be a film director, and I think he's going to make it."
Hmm,
Uh, and so he was always he was trained in that, in directing actors. But I mean, the whole Diana Ross, uh, the arc of that entire story with her is that everyone there was Sid's idea to cast her
yeah.
when people were bringing up Diana Sands and Diane Carroll and all and he's like, you need another Diana entirely. You need Diana Ross. And his idea is that he's seen her on a variety show and said like she can do comedy, and if you can do comedy, you can act.
Hmm,
Because to him, like he doesn't when he auditions actors, he doesn't do sides. He does a series of reactions, or he'll test them in a way like with Barry Newman talks about how he put him in front of cameras at Paramount in New York and immediately launched into like an inquiry to his character as a lawyer and said like, well, I understand that you would defend a rapist. And Barry was like, oh, and then he got, was like, oh yes, well, I would, and he began playing the part in the
right,
movie without
right.
knowing anything about the character. It's like Sydney was basically saying, how much can you be a lawyer for me right
Yes,
now?
right.
And then he'll do a phone conversation with other people who audition for parts to see what he calls emotional transitions. How well can an actor transition from surprise to happiness to whatever, and to
Right.
keep on making those emotional transitions. And that's how he judges and how he auditions his actors. So with Diana Ross, everyone doubted that she could play Diana Ross, in any form. Even like a 2.5 hour movie, they doubted that she could play her that she could play Billie Holiday in in like a little short sketch. And there were all these opinion pieces that were printed, like how dare they cast someone like Diana Ross as Billie Holiday. Like, where are they? Have they lost their mind? Have they taken leave of their senses? And all these nasty pieces. And then like the movie comes out and Diana is Oscar nominated, and people are retracting what they wrote before. Leonard Feather in the Times. It's like yeah, I was wrong. It's a great performance,
Yeah.
and it took making her comfortable, because originally she came to us like, well, why do I have to memorize all this? Why can't the movie just be 5 scenes? And she was so wet behind the ears, and he's like, well, Sydney's like, well, it's okay. We're gonna play with this, and they always had more than one camera going at a time, and there's a whole thing about like, I like your teeth, and I like, oh, you're in this kind of like, and Sydney told me later, it's like, I had my secretary Marlene Pivnik, I had Marlene type it up, like what we had improvised. I had her type it up into screenplay form based on the audio, and she comes like, this is shit. Did you really shoot this? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, go go watch the dailies. And then she watches like, oh, they're great together. And it's like that's such a wonderful scene where their first date and everything. It's like, yeah, that's like, now It's like, but at first she's typing it up like, this is shit. Like, you really think this? So it really becomes a process. And for me as well as a director, is like, I work extensively with improvisation. You begin with a structured form, and then you fill in, to actors. Okay, you begin here, you end here. At some point, you have to get to this, and this.
Right.
And I was listening to the editor of New York, New York, the Scorsese movie the other day, which is another almost entirely, I think, entirely improv movie. The editor Tom Rolfe saying like, listen, directors love improvisation, actors love improvisations, editors hate improvisation.
Yeah. It's a nightmare for the editors.
Yeah, yeah. But the good news is that I do a lot of my own editing, so I know when I'm directing, it's like, okay, I know that this gesture with this line, you develop what Joe Dante calls an editor's brain. Like, this gesture with this line and that delivery can cut off this other thing that I got in this earlier take, or you complete a take and it's like, oh wait, well, if I want that to work, I'm going to have to get something that's going to connect to that part later. So you tell your actors like, you remember when you did this? I want you at this point, I want you to do it this way so that I can cut it. And so if you're your own editor, it's a little easier. And if you have that editor's brain, if you can get that working for you, I think a lot of the best directors come from an editing background because they know how things fit, you
Right.
know.
Right.
And I think Joe Dante often talks about like, oh, trailer editing was a great education for me because you learn what are the primal constituent, like, um, fundamental elements of a movie as a whole,
Mm.
and really paring it down to size, really making it punchy, making it, and then you learn a lot about directing a larger movie from editing trailers
Mm.
and editing just in general. But like, if you can develop an editor's brain, it's going to help you in actually directing and working with actors on set, because you're going to make them feel free, and you're going to know what you need in order to not pull your hair out when you're trying to piece it all together later. So
Right. Right.
I think a lot of the best directors have some training in that craft.
Mm.
And I think Sid knew how. I mean, when he would work very closely in editing with Argie Nelson for many years. His main editor was a guy named Argyle Nelson, or Argie, and he'd work very closely with Argie. And sometimes he would edit, and Argie would go to the gym. He would say, Argie would go off to the gym, and Sydney would continue piecing it together, because he would know based on what he shot, like, oh, I knew I could piece that together, that together, that together. Um, and he'd develop that for himself. Um, and I think that's a key part of it. So by the time that the jazz singer, from which he was fired, comes along, and Neil Diamond is having this neurotic, like, psychotic break from the he completely cannot function as a film actor.
Mm.
Um, and then Sidney, I mean, having to compensate his shooting with six cameras around a bed with various lenses, so that if he only needs to get anything one time,
Right.
and they can move on. And then like Richard Fleischer comes along and takes over, and it's like he like kind of expresses kind of almost disgust in his book. Like, the previous director to me was shooting six cameras at one time around a bed. It's like, well, you got to realize that the jazz singer Neil Diamond version isn't that wonderful, Mr. Fleischer. And so like you gotta. I'm sure if you had had Sid in the editing room, he could have figured out something um, that would have seemed a lot more maybe naturalistic at the very least to make Neil a little more feel a little more germane to the cinema form. But without that code, without that codex in your brain, it's going to make it all the harder for the directors coming in and looking at what's already shot and being like, "Oh, we're gonna have to reshoot all this because I don't know how to piece any of this together." Sidney would have known. Sidney
Yeah.
would have known. Yeah.
Well, like
So
I
yeah,
said, I watched a number of his films. I just list the ones I saw. So I saw his debut, A Dangerous Age, The Ipcress File, The Leather Boys, The Boys, Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York, The Lawyer, During One Night, Little Fauss, and Big Halsey, and Hit. Um, really
you
like
really
them.
did.
Was that sorry?
You really did your homework.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to watch more, but I couldn't quite squeeze in one more. But I must say, I think my favorite was is it Faust or Foss? Little Foss,
Boss. Yeah.
Foss. I don't know. I was saying
Boss.
Faust.
Yeah.
Foss, Little Foss, and Big Halsey. I loved. I mean, that was probably
Good.
it's probably not his best film, but it was my favorite. And it's a shame because you wrote about Redford. Redford wasn't crazy about the film. He didn't even seem too into it. Not that he sort of walked through his performance as he said, but it's probably one of the great performances he ever gave. I mean, I would have never thought that Redford, because he's always very like laid back, self-assured, charming, and those qualities are in that character. But at the same time, he's also self-destructive, and a real lowlife in that film in a lot of ways. But I just thought everything it was saying about betrayal and destruction of friendship, it reminded me of like Mikey and Nicky, which came later, similar themes and character types. I loved it. It's a shame that Redford needs to know that that's probably the best performance he gave.
I think I think Redford. Well, I know that Alan J. Pakula, when they were working on All the President's Men,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
there's it's in the book.
Yeah.
Redford said like, oh, they showed that awful fucking movie Little Foss and Big Halsey on TV last night. God, I wish they would just bury that thing. And Alan J. Pakula's like, Bob, that's your best performance. Like, what are you
His
talking
son
about?
too, right? Didn't Redford's son? Wasn't that his
Yeah,
Redford?
and Rucker's son as well thinks it's his best, his dad's best. So yeah, it's in Al Ruddy, who has since passed on, who produced The Godfather and produced Little Foss and Big Halsey.
Yeah.
Al, I was in his office and I interviewed him in person, and Al was like, Bob, I love him, but he's very image conscious, and he likes the image of himself in Sidney Pollack movies.
Oh, I see.
Uh,
Yeah.
where he's classy, dignified, you
Awesome.
know. What's that?
More of a positive character in the
Yeah,
Paul
positive. Yeah,
films
yeah,
generally.
yeah, exactly. And and as Al put it, I wouldn't put it this way per se, but Al has put it like a little, just a little antiseptic. Um, in the Pollock movies, which is not an issue really, but like that's the cultivated Redford, I guess.
Right.
Um, Whereas Foss is a cad. He's a bastard, and he's a
Yeah.
misogynist, and he's and it's a very much a so what world, as I say in that movie. Like they race first, and then they deal with the pregnant lady giving birth after.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very kind of vaguely nihilist, maybe vaguely just, it's, yeah, it's and then of course you have the interplay between the Pollard and the Redford character, which is echoed in certain shots. Like there's a shot in the Leather Boys, which is echoed in Little Foss and Big Halsey when one follows the other. You could put one on top of the other, it would
Yeah.
superimpose perfectly.
Yes.
It's a repeat shot, and it's like, oh, and then you think about, like, there are a couple lines in the script, three is queer, something like that, so it's there are intimations that Foss sleeps with men when he needs to, when there's something for him to gain.
Right.
Uh, and there's this kind of emulation on the part of Pollard to Redford. He's trying to become Halsey in the last act.
Right.
He wants to conquer women the way that Foss does. He begins to act the cad the way that Halsey does.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a kind of a weird hero worship there that I think is very rich. And when
Very
you put it up,
relatable too. I think a lot of,
yeah,
particularly men, fall,
yeah,
can relate to those kind of friendships.
yeah. Yeah, if you put it up all against Sid's other movies, it really does line up perfectly. And Hit, I love. Hit is one that I love personally because Hit to me is like
Really
I
good.
I always, I always call it Rio Bravo for the French Connection era because that movie is mostly it's a hangout movie. Like
Yeah.
it's not even get a couple action pieces in there, but it's mostly them hanging out and training, and
Yeah.
then like the final mission is often done at a remove in these wide shots or very careful pacing of these sequences where they rub out all these drug lords in Marseille. But really, the journey is that movie, like the finding of the ability finding the team. And then when he finds the team, he gets the hacienda in the Pacific Northwest, and then they're just hanging out for a lot of the movie, like they do in Rio
Ready.
Bravo
Yeah.
or a Hawks movie, and like they become familial in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, where the point like that the night before the mission is to begin, Billy D is calling everyone and saying like, I wish you a nice life, and
Yeah.
the old couple in bed, or the guy with the French hamburgers. It's like we've seen him eat so many hamburgers through the course of this
All
movie.
the McDonald's.
He's in
Yeah.
France. Now he's in France. He's eating a French hamburger, and it's like it's I don't know why, but it's weirdly touching to me. It's just
Yeah.
like we've gotten to know all of them in this
Yeah.
kind of weirdly intimate way. Um, and they become a unit and a bit of a family, and we really hope the best for them. And by the time Richard Pryor is doing
Oh, he's
the
great.
when he's like improving that thing to Gwen Wells after she's like, I'm scared,
Oh yeah, I figured that was improv,
you think
only because I read the book. But
yeah,
it's so very Prior the way
yeah, yeah.
and the
Well,
way
like it,
he humored her to make her laugh. That was just it was
yeah,
perfect. It felt so real, which it was. I mean, it was totally.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that film. That to me is that film to me is a piece of Sidney's heart, I think.
Mm, yeah,
I think that gets to who he is from I guess you might say a sentimental point of view, like how he looks at people, how this core group kind of come to kind of weirdly cling to each other, even when they're occasionally using each other, and
yeah.
that's reflective of something bigger, I think. So I love Hit. I love Hit. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot as well, and I know you know a lot about Canadian film, and it occurred to me as I was watching it that there this might even sound strange, but if you watch Adam Egoyan's The Sweet Hereafter,
Yeah,
the lawyer in that is doing a very similar thing for a very similar motive, and I was
yeah.
like, I wonder if they if or that's just a coincidence, but
I
it's
would I
very
was I,
similar.
would- I was thrilled recently when someone I think it was Saul Pincus, who was Sidney's longtime editor out of Toronto. Saul, I think it was Saul, sent me a picture of a display outside of the TIFF light box, and it was just like a bunch of great Canadian directors' names,
Yeah,
just like lined up, Agoyan, and like and then prominent among them was Fury.
yeah.
And I not to toot my I think Sidney has long deserved the recognition, and of course he was honored by the Directors Guild of Canada Lifetime Achievement Award, and that was a long and rambling but beautiful speech that he gave that you can watch online.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I see I go into there's a I live in Pasadena now, but I went into a video store in LA months back, and it's one of the main boutique video stores where like privately owned. They have special sections, um, and they have a number directors section that it doesn't seem like they'd be able to represent all directors, but a lot of directors get their own section. And I'm looking around and Fury, I'm looking around for Fury and it's like, oh, maybe he's not Fury. And then I go to the Canada section and it's like got a big Fury shelf. It's like, yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, yeah. I was
That's,
like, yeah. As I told people, I'm not sure that would have happened before the book. So I have to have some type of pride that and people go into boards now. I just went into one the other day, people referring to Fury as an interesting director, an artist to look out for. Someone posted very, very favorably of the Boys Company C and said, and we're raving about it and saying like, oh, Fury's a really interesting director. And I was like, yeah, it does my heart good because I think it's about time that people recognize it.
yeah, no, for sure. No, we all owe it. We all owe it to you that you brought that you that you reminded us of how great of a filmmaker he is. Because I'm not sure if I would have seen any of these films if I hadn't read your book or heard about the box set. Yeah, I mean, I knew of the Ipcress file. I'm just looking at the list, but a lot of them I hadn't heard of. But one just going back to Sheila Levine. Because he did have a number of clashes with actors, not that they were his fault usually. With the but Jeannie Berlin, I mean, wow, I mean to think that she walked off with like 9 or 10 days left and wouldn't promote it and argued constantly. I don't know if you talked to her, but why? I mean, I can understand some arguments, but why? She didn't work for another 15 years in movies, right? Like Jesus, why would
I
she have?
have I have I have heard things since the book was published that yeah, I don't know whether to
Say it?
elucidate, but yeah, she was considered difficult by everyone who was there to witness it. I just got a message a couple weeks ago from an actor on Sheila Levine, um, who contacted me and just and I was like, yeah, and of course I had to ask, like, was Jeannie as ill behaved as they say? And it's like, oh, you don't know the half of it. You know, that was and I've gotten that's been the main refrain on that has been like, yeah, Jeannie was a piece of work. But looking at that movie, I mean, she's
She's great in it.
terrific,
Yeah,
great,
yeah, yeah.
and like the fact that I mean, that ending that is culled from an earlier scene that they shot with Jeannie. And if you listen to the commentary track on the Blu-ray, you will take you through. Sid and I will take you through like, okay, so the ending scene where she's listening back to the recording of Scheider,
Yeah,
um, that was taken of her from an earlier scene. They did not shoot that. They got Roy back
right.
and they got a double. They got a body double for Jeannie shooting shadowy from behind her,
Yeah, from behind.
and her reaction to him talking to her and the recording and everything is from the earlier scene with Rebecca Diana Smith. You'll notice that she's wearing the same outfit and
Ah,
she says the same lines, but it's a different context now.
God,
So
yeah.
what they did is Sid wrote dialogue around these earlier lines to make them new. And then the movie just ends because there's no line of her saying, "Yes, I'll marry you." It just cuts out on like, "Will you marry?" Or where it comes out, and you'll have no idea how much I love you on the recording, we're listening back to, and we
Right.
don't need to hear the answer. The movie goes out from there. She's gotten what she's wanted, and that I mean that ending is better
Oh,
than
yeah.
if she had said yes. It's better than if she had said yes. I'll marry
I know,
you.
I agree. I like the ambiguity.
Yeah,
Because I read that chapter before watched the movie, and I was literally like a couple of times. I mean, I got so lost in the film that like I wasn't
yeah,
even like you can't tell that she wasn't there for like 10 days, and that there's body
yeah.
doubles everywhere. You can't. I mean, it's seamless, and yeah, I mean, she's remarkable in it. But I don't know. Maybe there's something self-destructive there. Why you would do that at such a young age when your career was rising?
Well, she is resurfaced now, and she's doing good work. But it took her a number of years to come out of that, I think. And what happened on Sheila Levine followed her for quite a while.
Yeah.
So yeah,
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 because like I said, I think the next film she did was 1990. So you're talking
yeah,
15
yeah.
years that she
In the
wasn't.
mood, I think it was, or in the spirit, yeah, in the mood, I think, right? 1990. Anyway, yeah, it took a number of
Yeah.
years. She tried out for the Sandra Bernhard part in
Oh,
the King of Comedy.
oh yeah, I could see her doing that.
Yeah, which I think she would have been great doing. I mean, I do love Sandra Bernhard in that role, to be clear, but
Yeah, yeah, me too.
uh,
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
yeah,
She's similar
yeah,
temperament. Yeah,
yeah,
I could see that. Is there any? I think we talked about this a little bit online, but his Canadian feature, a cool sound from hell, right? Is that what?
yes,
Okay. Is there any chance we'll see that? I know because that's like a buried treasure.
yeah. There have been talks. We were initially chatting because it premiered actually. It was never shown in Canada ever, even though it was made there. But it premiered in Canada at TIFF back in 2016.
Wish I saw it. Yeah,
Yeah,
damn.
but
I guess I just didn't know, but I would have
yeah,
went.
yeah. Sid and I were both there, and we both did the Q&A. Sid took most of it over because, of course, he was the maker, and he was charming to the last at that Q&A. He always says that I don't like going public. And it's like, Sid, you are completely like, people loved him that night. He literally sprinted across the stage at one point to demonstrate something. And I remember the great thing about that is someone asked a question that night. It's like, the movie kind of moralizes a bit against the beats and against the jazz culture and the drugs and everything else. Does the movie reflect how you felt about that culture? And without missing a beat, he just went, I loved it. And riotous laughter from him because it was perfect time. It was like, I loved it.
I wish I was there, but there is like a 3 minute interview with him. Must have been that year on YouTube where they're going to Union Station, which for anyone who hasn't been into Toronto is this like massive subway station we have here with beautiful exterior outside, and they're showing he's walking where and they're cutting to the movie, and so I just we can there's only some clips from there that where people could see some clips. But I hope it comes. I hope it comes out, and even his first At Dangerous Age. That's not out on Blu-rays yet, I don't believe.
No,
Yeah.
it would be ideal to get them in like a two-pack. And
Yes. Yes.
there've been talks to that effect, but nothing official yet.
I hope so. I hope
Yeah.
it comes out sometime down the road. I just had one last question because you end the book with the an article he wrote where he was criticizing Hollywood, and then there was a rebuttal from Herb Aller, the executive secretary of Local 659, International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees and Moving Picture Machine Operators. I was curious why you ended it with that conflict there between.
Well, Sid didn't like me doing that actually. That was a slight bone of contention. He got over it, but I wanted to feature that as an appendix because I thought it was really apropos that this guy who makes his name on a very visual movie in England, being the Ipcress file, which has a different crews were different there, a lot freer, and then he immigrates to Hollywood, and there are all these rules, regulations, restrictions, and how a guy as creative as that has faces that down, and even going as far as to publish that in the Times and being like, listen, directors should have control of their cameras.
Yeah.
Like I should have the freedom to frame up my own shots because like he was the framing guy. Like he was known for his frames and his compositions by then, and that he was cut short of being able to do that, I think frustrated him. So I think writing that piece and then the rebuttal, Hollywood wasn't yet able to recognize that directors were, and then it only took a few more years from there to be like, well, now we're going to give directors a little more control over what we're putting in the cameras, what into the film that we're filming, because that's when the auteurs and the 70s great film artists began to take over and everything. But that was just shy of that time, and it was early kind of harbinger of a director coming over and saying like, listen, it shouldn't be this way. I should have control over my image as the director. And I thought it was an interesting back and forth between a very hidebound, stick in the mud type guy and someone like Sid, who is coming from as a hot shot from England.
It made me laugh when Herb said, "Oh well, you can't use handheld for dramatic scenes." I was like, "What the?
Yeah,
How wrong he was."
yeah.
Everybody does that.
Historical documents can be funny because I mentioned this in a piece that I did. Sydney was one of the directors invited to a director's choice night at the Academy in 1968. It was the fall of 1968, and they invited I think Cukor or Capra, they invited I think Hitchcock, and they were all they told them, I'll pick your favorite or of your movies or one that you want to show to film students. And among that cohort, Sidney and Norman Jewison were and Coppola were the young guns that were invited to pick one of their movies to show it to film students. And there are transcripts of these Q&A sessions that the Academy still holds in their archives, which I've been able to access. For the one for Coppola is hilarious because the one for Coppola he references like, oh, my friend George Lucas made a film about me making the Rain People, and Lucas is spelled Lukas by by the transcriber. Um, the funny part of that is Sydney's transcript. One of the film students said that you're kind of a legend among young directors right now because of your framing and your the way that you compose shots, and many of them are low angle shots. And why are there so many low angle shots? What are you attracted to it? And Sydney quipped, "It's because I'm praying all the time."
That's a perfect line.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, they're full. I mean, they're multi-page. I want to say that the one for Fury is 30 to 40 some pages, I want to say, with just to him in dialogue with the the film students of that time
Wow.
at UCLA. I think he was in dialogue with the UCLA kids, and there are ones for Coppola there. The King Vidor I know was one of them, but it was a series. I think it was like a dozen or so directors who were invited.
Oh.
So the young guard and the old guard.
Hmm.
So for those who want to visit the Herrick, the Academy Library in LA, if you're interested, those are available to view.
Okay. Well, again, the book is called Sidney J. Furie, Life in Films. For people who want to get a copy, Daniel, where would you suggest they go?
Wherever books are sold, really, you can get them on eBay. I think there's a signed copy on eBay, which I must
Oh,
have. I think I signed. Sid and I signed, I believe, at TIFF. So
oh, right.
there's one fetching, I think, $70 if you want a signed copy, or if you're in LA and you want to buy a copy and track me down, gladly autograph it for you.
Oh, perfect.
This is the Sid actually autographed mine here.
Oh, so nice.
To Daniel, there are no words to express my gratitude and respect.
Ah,
So
perfect. They also
that's
have it. I know you already know this, but they have it at the TIFF by Lightbox as well. Last time
yeah,
I had it.
I'm happy to hear that. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if you're
and
in Toronto, you can find it there.
the foreword is written by Pierce Handling. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
If you're in
Pierce,
Toronto, you know him. You know him for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, someone showed me that on the shelves at the light box, and I couldn't have been happier. And of
Yeah.
course, when I first tracked down Cool Sound from Hell, one last little tale, um, Pierce and Steve Gravestock had been looking for that film for years.
Oh, is that right?
They'd hit up all the archives because it was like the great lost Canadian movie, like the
Yeah.
Great White Whale, because it was MIA for so long. Then when I finally got it and tracked it down and got the transfer and everything and shared it with them, Pierce um, emailed me and said like, "Well, you must have better contacts at the BFI than I do." And I was like, I got it. Someone who is doing research there gave me this woman's name, and she hooked me up. So
Oh,
yeah,
lucky. Fantastic.
yeah, I got lucky. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And the box set, of course, you can get from Imprint Films.
Print, yeah, we were saying the work that I have done for Sydney, but the that would have been that would have meant less if it hadn't been for Imprint Films for the box set and for Patrick McGilligan and his faith in me for my first book. So I'd be nowhere without those two things. So yay to Imprint and yay to University Press of Kentucky Screen Classics series under Patrick McGilligan,
Oh,
because
definitely.
Sydney is undergoing a resurgence thanks to them.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And lastly, if people want to follow you online or social media, where's the best place for them to go?
Only Facebook, unfortunately. I am on Blue Sky, but I don't use it because they don't let me post at length yet. So, I am on Facebook though, yes.
Facebook. Okay, perfect. Well, Daniel, thanks again. This was such a treat, and I really enjoyed talking to you and reading the book and
Thank you.
seeing so many films, and I'll see more. So come back sometime down the road, and we'll talk some more.
We'll talk some hopefully about Irving Rapper.
Yeah.
One of those. Yeah. Cool. All right,
And
thank you, sir.
for those of you watching, thanks so much for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/RobertBellissimo at the movies for full details. You can also leave a donation or what I call a tip by clicking the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on that and you can leave a donation if you choose to. Of course, I would greatly appreciate that. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movie logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that. And then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos. I would also really appreciate if you leave a comment, share the video, like the video. All of these things create traction onto my YouTube channel and really help share the video far and wide and the channel in general. So thank you so much for doing that, and I will see you all in the next one.